When we look at the raw facts of the matter, I mean, we're in a very, very fortunate position. For one thing, you are all fortunate enough to be born as a human in this lifetime. There are other alternatives. You're also fortunate enough to be living in a part of the world that is relatively peaceful, not entirely peaceful. Not that difficult things don't happen here. And, we're not denying that, bombs are falling elsewhere in the world to cause great suffering. But we can also be grateful for the opportunity to enjoy the relative peace that we enjoy in this part of the world. If we were running for our lives in terror, it would be unlikely that we'd be willing to hear this type of teaching. So we can be grateful for that. We also live at a time where the teachings about liberation, the age-old teachings, are available and not censored or outlawed, or this hasn't always been the case. I mean, there were times when in history where, people were tortured and killed for this kind of teaching. So it may not always be the case, but it is the case to a large degree in this part of the world at this time. And we're also very fortunate that we, for whatever reason, have encountered these kinds of teachings and are willing to listen, willing to entertain the possibility. Okay. So in many ways, we're very, very blessed. And, unlike other times in history, we don't have to go live in a cave. We don't have to join a monastery. We don't have to make arrangements for international travel. It's all readily available on the internet, inexpensively, often for free. It's so available that sometimes it's hard to discern which teachings may be helpful and which teachings may not be. Which teachings are a shortcut to what we seek, and which teachings are maybe a long cut. So when we find ourselves, at any point on this journey to find what has always been there, it's not always clear where we are or where we're going. It may be more clear where we've been, the kinds of things that we've seen to date, but what may not at all be clear is the kinds of things where we're maybe stuck now or have not yet seen. So when we look to the rear, it may be clear. When we look forward, it may be a little bit like trying to find our way in a dense fog. I remember one time I was by myself in a small boat, small little tiny motor on it, and it was so foggy that you could not see more than, 40, 50 feet ahead of you. And the water, there was absolutely no wind, so the direction of the wind didn't give you any, you couldn't tell anything from the water about which direction you were going. So all you could do is start from one shore and sort of take a bearing to where you thought you wanted to be. But your only way of seeing the direction you were going is to look backwards to see, you could see how straight you were going, but you couldn't tell going forward. And it's a bit like that, where it's not at all clear what the next step may be. And that all we have to keep us on course, so to speak, is our own integrity and our willingness to continue, right? A little courage doesn't hurt either. So just that desire to somehow continue to look for what is what we may not even know how to characterize it. But there can be this movement out of longing. Saint Francis said that what you are looking for is what is looking. In other words, it's almost as if God is seeking itself through your eyes. You know, it sounds like a quite dramatic statement, almost heretical, right? And yet, if the idea is not to just take it on as a belief as well, you know, that's true, you know, I'll go with that, but rather to really feel into that possibility, whether that could actually be true, because the sense of looking for what we are changes the movement. It changes from me as a separate self, vulnerable, you know, in a big world, looking for something outside of myself, something better than me, something higher than me, more spiritual, right? It changes that to what am I believing that is preventing me from seeing what is already the case? So they're two quite different searches. I mean, one is looking for what is inhibiting me from seeing what is already true, and the other one is how do I get from here to there? How do I get from here to there when I'm not quite sure what here is, and I have no idea what there is, and I've only just been told how to get from here to there? So that's where teachers can be helpful if they have indeed explored the territory. Then they can provide some guidance, you know, how to what the territory looks like. You know, without a teacher, it's not impossible, but it can be much more difficult. It would sort of be like, you know, if you lived on the East Coast and you had heard about Los Angeles, but you didn't know how to get there, and you didn't have any maps, and you didn't have a compass, and but you wanted to go to Los Angeles. You might get there, but it might take a long time, right? If you had no map of the territory, if you had no reports back of what to do. But if someone, you know, gave some guidance, you know, like get on Route 40 and take a left when you hit the coast, I mean, that would, you know, give you at least something to go on. So the role of a teacher is really to provide suggestion for a direction to look. Teacher, any teacher, the most profound sage that ever lived, can't do it for you. You still have to do it yourself. But what the teacher can do is to point a fruitful direction. And then it's up to you. You can either, you know, trust that enough to try it for yourself, or take it as a concept and believe it or disbelieve it. But the only thing of real value is to test it out for yourself. It doesn't actually matter what anybody else says about it. Maybe they're right, maybe they're not. You know, maybe they've actually experienced it, maybe they haven't. But a teacher that is of value is someone who's actually explored the territory and can give useful pointers. You can't convey the actual experience um, because it's not reducible to words or concepts or theologies. Um, but what a teacher can do is provide a suggestion of a direction to look. You still have to do the hard work yourself, but at least you can narrow the possibilities. I don't think without, I mean, I've said this to Adyashanti, without his teaching, I doubt, I don't have any reason to believe that I would have found my way home in this lifetime. So it has value. Every teacher will, and any true teacher would speak from their own experience, not from hearsay. And since every path is unique, everyone's experience of how they arrived at a realization is going to be different. So the teachings are going to be different. Does that make one right and the other one wrong? No, of course not. But what is more valuable is listening from the point of view of trying to see the perspective that the teaching is coming from, more than trying to dissect and analyze the words. If we're too caught up in the terminology or the whether this teaching agrees with that teaching, or whether it agrees with your own ideas that you learn from some other place. All of that's trying to sort this out in your head, and that's not where the actual realization lies. Where it does lie is in the recognition of one's own innate awareness, that already present capacity that is complete for everybody. So this idea of trusting a teacher is really trusting to the extent of being willing to try it for yourself, and that you just have to use your own judgment there, whether that movement is coming from a place of feeling like it resonates with you, more so than it just appeals to one's ego, right? It sounds like it is, an enhancement of myself, extra spiritual powers. The ego likes that, right? So we can decide what we're really in it for. Either we're in it to find out what's really true, or we're in it to feel better. Right? They're two very different things. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better, of course. But if that is our primary motivation, then we're going to tend to shy away from the more challenging parts of the journey. If we just want to feel good, then we just want what we want. Right? If we're in it to find out what's true, then it's almost like we've taken off the blinders and are willing to see whatever it is that needs to be seen. So it's quite a different movement, and the outcomes are quite different. Right? Okay, so when we talk about our retaining our authority, one reason I've been talking about teachers is that there is this tendency of, in some schools of spiritual teachings to introduce this idea of surrender to the guru, right? And it's not that it can't work. It sort of depends almost entirely on the clarity of the teacher. But it's a dangerous path to give up one's innate intelligence, really, to give that away to anybody. So again, we come back to, is this teaching something? I'm not talking about tonight's teaching. I'm talking about teachers in general. Is the teaching useful? If I try it out, is it productive? Is it does it resonate with what I truly am? And the reason for being careful with that, choosing a teacher and how one relates to that, is that there's a level of trust, but then there's also a level of retaining one's own authority. To know deep down what feels right and what feels, something starts to veer off what feels, deep down honest to you, then it's worth being wary of that, right? But all teaching is only valid. Any particular teaching is only valid for a particular point in one's journey. A teaching and instruction is not a forever kind of thing. Like it's, we can just hold on to it forever. A teaching that we have understood ourselves as a direct experience, we can say, if someone talks about it, we can say, yeah, I know that one. I've done that. I've been there. I've experienced that. And sometimes I remember when I, for the several years I was with Adyashanti, there were some things that he would talk about that I could recognize that I hadn't experienced. And it's good to know the difference, right? It's good to know that, that may be true. He appears like a honest, trustworthy person, but as in my own experience, I just haven't experienced that yet. So I'll file it in the maybe that may be true category. It would be incorrect, no matter how much I trusted that person and no matter how much I respected that person, to put it in the I'll believe that category, right? So it's good to know what we know, and it's good to recognize what we haven't not yet experienced. But even hearing teachings about things that we haven't yet experienced has value, because one day when we do experience that, it can give us a context. It can help us understand what's really happening then, to really fully utilize and understand that experience. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that a teaching might be that even after awakening, we might still find ourselves caught in contracted states. And it's not wrong. It's actually a way of further clarifying our relationship with our mind. Okay, so we can hear that teaching, and if the awakeness hasn't happened yet, but one day does, and then if we find those contracted states, if we haven't heard that teaching before, it can be quite alarming to feel like, last week it was also perfectly clear, and this week I feel as lost as ever. And it can be quite upsetting and confusing. But if we've heard that teaching, it's like, oh yeah, that's what's happening. It's just the mind doing what it does. Nothing more. The awareness is still present. No problem. So it can help us, by hearing the teaching at one point and sort of just putting it on the back burner, without disbelieving it, without taking it on as a immutable truth. It just is available when we need it. Okay, so the other way we can give away our authority is to our mind. Right? What we all learned without even realizing we were learning it as we grew up. We all learned that what I am is this body and this mind, this organism. That's what I am. The sum total of my history and my beliefs and preferences and desires and ideas and etc. That's what I am. So if that's our belief, then it's easy to assign the mind the position of power to tell us what's right and what's wrong, what we should have done, what we shouldn't have done. And the mind likes that. The mind likes that position of authority. And so in a sense, we've given that thoroughly conditioned thinking mind the authority to basically be an inner tyrant, right? The one that sort of sits in judgment of what we did right, what we didn't do, what we should have done, sits in judgment of other people, knows what's right and wrong and good and bad ideas and all those self-judgments about our flaws and maybe even our strengths, our unworthinesses and our worthiness, both. This inner, sometimes it's called the higher self. It's not higher, it's just, sort of imagines itself higher. It's just another thought stream generated like every other thought stream, but imagines it to be somehow better than, the parental voice in our head. So it's sort of like, working in an office with an abusive manager, that's always, hypercritical and, always prepared to yell at you for what you did wrong or what you should have done or what you could have done better. And even when you do something right, it feels like, well, I just can't rest on that because, tomorrow that person, the manager, will forget all about it and be mad at me again and tell me I can do better. So there's this sort of underlying sense of anxiety, like always having to live up to some ideal that somehow is being imposed by my own mind on myself. And it's like, living in the same house with this tyrannical supervisor, right? It's actually not all that much different than if you've ever been in, I guess it's more common in a larger city, but there's some homeless person, wandering down a crowded street, sort of muttering to themselves, talking to themselves out loud. Our assumption is, well, that person's maybe crazy. The only difference is we don't do it out loud. We just do it in the silence of our own head. But that same muttering quality is present. Right? The same way we sort of talk to ourselves in terms that are quite repetitive. Often quite critical. And the power of that is the power that we endow it with the belief that it's true. That's what gives it power. So we create our own critic, create our own judge and jury. and we give away our authority to that. That becomes the ideal. That becomes what we should be, how we should act, how we should relate to the world. It's really just the inner tyrant, right? So if we try to negotiate with that inner critic, we empower it. We try to appease that inner critic by doing more and more and more. We also empower it. So what to do? What we can do is just see that it's just a bundle of thoughts, a bundle of highly conditioned thoughts that we repeat to ourselves, we believe, and we suffer from. Not always. That voice seems to be more convincing when we're feeling sort of low anyway, or tired, or had a hard day. So the way out of that loop where we're in relationship with this unreasonable tyrant, the way out of that loop is just to step out of it, to see that what we truly are is the awareness that notices that whole mechanism. The resolution isn't to try to, defang the tyrant. It's not to, not to argue our way out of it, or it's just to see that it's just conditioning. It's just the way the mind has been conditioned to talk to itself. And what entrenches it is the power of our belief. So by retaining our authority, I'm not talking about, obviously emphatically not talking about, just reverting to the authority of everything that goes through my head and thinking that is the final authority. It's not. When I'm speaking of you being your own authority, I'm talking about awareness. The awareness that is present for whatever is arising, including all of the thoughts and self-talk that's happening. Right? Okay, so it's just coming back to that essence of what we are, and see that that all of that talk and judgment and everything is happening within that awareness. The awareness is big enough to allow even that. This journey isn't about chasing down every fault. It's really not. It's about seeing what has enough capacity to include it all. Even the conditioning, even the difficult conditioning. Can we be okay with that? Awareness is okay with that already. May not be that much fun, but we can just notice how this organism that is very much a part of this ever-changing world responds to certain conditions. I mean, we wake up and it's a beautiful, warm, sunny day, and the flowers are out. We feel good, feel happy, right? We hear about a dear friend having a serious disease, we feel worried. Someone, says something derogatory about us or something that we hold dear. You might feel hurt. These bodies respond to conditions. So if one of the conditions is a frequent self-critical mind, this body mind will sense that, will suffer as a result of that. We can try to ignore it or minimize it or improve it or love it to death or all of those things. But the only real solution is just to step back into the awareness that's present for it all and notice that it all changes, always changes. And if we allow that to whatever is presented within that field of awareness, whatever's presented, if we allow it to come, we allow it to go, we stay present for it, learn from it, be observant of it, it's okay. Right? Of course, we'll prefer some things rather than others, but we have all survived difficult times, all survived mundane times, we've all survived good times, always changing. But if we keep holding out like a life should look like this and not like that, should only be the good times, we'll always be disappointed. Because even when things go our way, it's like, well, this isn't going to last, I know that. The other shoe will drop. Okay, so what we're talking about here is not relinquishing our authority, our integrity to the tyranny of this conditioned thinking judgmental mind. Right? It's not that we lose our ability to think, but this awareness has an ability to discern, to know, to feel what's really true. It's much more intuitive kind of knowing. In the East, they call it prajna, heart wisdom, wisdom that comes from a different place. Okay, so we might see, okay, I get that, we don't want to give away, we can listen to, trust a teaching to give us a pointer, knowing that we'll have to walk that path ourselves, but we can retain our authority. And we can also know that, well, I won't give away my authority to my thinking mind. I'll stand back and see the larger picture within which all of that is happening. Great. Okay. And then we might say, well, I'm on the spiritual path, so I'll be even more noble, and I'll relinquish my authority to God. Right? It sounds wonderful, right? Thy will be done. Let go, let God. Allow everything to be as it is. Beautiful words. How do you do that? Sort of depends on who's asking the question, right? If it's the little me, thoroughly identified with it being a separate, independent self, trying to surrender itself to some external divine being. Why would you do that? It's the little me trying to improve its situation, right? If I surrender to God, maybe my experience of this life, my experience will be better. Right? But so you have a false self trying to relinquish itself to a concept of some external divine entity. What could go wrong? So what are those kinds of sayings pointing to then? It's not that this separate self can do that. The separate self has no interest in doing that. Separate self likes the idea of it, of surrendering to the divine, but it actually has no interest in actually doing it. Because its worldview is that this, that I am, this body, mind, organism, is separate. The last thing that separate self wants to do is um, actually move in the direction of feeling its demise, because that's what it takes itself to be. If that's our belief, and for most people it is, that what I am is this separate self, this body, mind, me, this, the thoughts in my head, this body, that's what I am. And the idea of surrendering that um, to some exterior will just is beyond every instinct, every survival instinct of the body mind. It might sound like a good idea, but in practice, that movement won't happen. And so what's left is a possibility. What actually has the capacity um, to recognize unity with um, the entirety, with life, is awareness itself. It sort of depends on our concept of what we mean by the word God. Obviously a concept, right? It depends on what that concept means to the person using it. Does it mean a separate divine entity somehow removed from you and me that sometimes tinkers with things here on earth, judges us fairly harshly, as we've heard, after this lifetime? Is that really what we hold that to mean, or do we mean all of life, all of existence? Not only all of existence in form, but the potentiality, all of it, excluding nothing. If that's what we mean by the divine, then I would ask, where exactly is the boundary between awareness and that? If awareness itself has the capacity to be inclusive of everything that's ever seen, felt, heard, tasted, touched, seen, experienced, how is that separate from life in any way? When we seek unity from the assumption that what I am now is a separate self. How do you bridge that gap? But if the recognition of what we truly are is that spaciousness of awareness, which without judgment, without an agenda, is inclusive of everything, that is the recognition of unity. Nothing other than, nothing separate from. We don't achieve it. We recognize that it's already the case. We're not actually surrendering anything except false ideas. Not surrendering anything except mistaken beliefs about who we are. That's what's surrendered. And we surrender them not by trying real hard to surrender them, but by just seeing that they're not true. You know, if you're trying real hard to surrender them, but you sort of believe that they're probably still true, you're trying to, I don't know, open the door and close it at the same time. But if you can see that the fundamental assumption about what we are is this form, then not surrendering anything. We're just surrendering a false idea. We're letting it drop. It drops of its own non-existent weight. You don't have to try to make it drop. It's not even bad. You know, it's just something that we took on in innocence. And we can just see that. There's no blame, no fault. We're just mistaken. So our authority is once again retained in what we truly are as awareness. But what we find out is that awareness is not other than the whole, not other than life itself, not other than the entirety. And we find out that what St. Francis was pointing to is actually true. What you are looking for is what is looking as awareness. God seeking itself through form.